afternoon and welcome. I'm glad you could join us here. For those of you who are planning on joining with us in person, apologize for the last minute change where we were holding our lecture in the Hillel building. There was a gas leak, and the gas leak obviously will prevent us from being there in person. I know today's lecture will truly be a blast, but we don't want to have too much of a blast. So we decided to go completely virtual for this lecture. I'm Ed Wright. I'm a professor in the Center for Judaic Studies, and this is the Sally and Ralph Duchin Campus Lecture Series. The Duchins created this lecture series about 10 years ago now, and the purpose is for us to share expertise on campus with people who are working in areas related to the various fields covered in Judaic studies, a vastly interdisciplinary endeavor, who are our own faculty or faculty visiting the U of A at any given time. So today we have a very special opportunity, one that I've been looking forward to for some time, and I'm so delighted that we're able to actually make this happen. Today we have for our lecturer, Professor Joaquin Ruiz. Joaquin Ruiz, I'm going to have an introduction here that will detail some of the many activities that he's involved in. He received his undergraduate degree in Geology and Chemistry from the University of Miami, and then his master's and doctoral degrees in Geology from the University of Michigan. He joined the U of A's Geosciences department in 1983, was eventually promoted to associate professor in 89, and then to full professor in 93. He served as head of the Department of Geosciences from 1995 to 2000, when he became dean of the College of Science, a position he held until 2019. In addition, he has served as the executive dean of the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences from 2009 to 2018, as vice president for innovation from 2013 to 2019, and was appointed vice president of global environmental futures in 2019, and has served as the Thomas Brown Chair and Director of Biosphere 2 since 2013. His next promotion will be to Intergalactic Vice President of Intergalactic Relations or something. There's not much left for him to go. Dr. Ruiz has a long and distinguished career as a scholar and an exceptionally skilled academic leader. I have long admired him for both his scholarly achievements and specifically for the academic leadership he has provided at the U of A. I've been here 33 years and have, from the beginning admired him. And not just as a person, but not just as a professional, but also as a human being. He has served as president of the Geological Society of America, a fellow of the Society of Economic Geologists, a member of the American Geophysical Union, the American Chemical Society, the Geochemical Society, and the National Research Council of National Academies of Science. Counselor of the Geological Society of America, a National Science Foundation panel member for the Instrumentation and Facilities Program and the Centers for Excellence in Science and Technology Programs. I'll take a deep breath to catch up. He's been associate editor for leading geological journals, including the American Journal of Science, the Journal of Geology, and others. He's been deeply involved in promoting geological scholarship in Mexico as well. He's a member of the Mexican Academy of Sciences. He is named a national researcher by the Mexican government in 2010 and given in recognition of his outstanding scientific contributions and efforts to enhance Mexico's scientific and technological capacity. And he has done that through collaborations between the U of A and research institutions in Mexico. Crowning all of that In 2018, the Mexican Secretary of State named Professor Ruiz one of 40 distinguished Mexican citizens living abroad who have brought distinction to the country. As a scientist with equal abilities in chemistry and geology, Professor Ruiz addresses many first-order problems in earth sciences, such as the development of new isotope systems for studying ore deposits and the tectonic processes involved in the growth and evolution of Mexico. His research team addresses problems ranging from the origins of life to present-day climate change. But as I said, Joaquin is more than a scientist. He is a true humanist with a long history of personal commitment to caring for and improving people's lives. I think it's fair to say that while his achievements as a scientist attest his intellectual prowess, his humanitarian involvement showed his thoughtful and caring heart. It is, at least in my view, a rare person who rises to the level of achievement that Joaquin has in his life. We, this university and our city, are indeed fortunate to have him with us. Thank you, Joaquin. And now we're fortunate to have him discuss his work in the Arava Valley, a desert valley extending from the Dead Sea down to the Gulf of Aqaba, the Gulf of Eilat, and straddling the border between Israel and Jordan. The title of his lecture today is The Arava Valley, a lesson on how to live a life with meaning. Please join me in welcoming Professor Joaquin Ruiz. Joaquin, take it away.
Ed, I'm embarrassed. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I have to say, though, that I don't know where you got all that stuff. When I Google my name, or I once did it just to see, the person that gets most Googles is a dancer of flamenco. His name is Joaquin Ruiz. I think I'd rather change places with that individual. But here I am. And I think Ed and I have a mutual admiration for each other. I think he's extraordinary in many ways. But more importantly, he's a real mensch. He's a real human being that cares for others. And it shows every time he opens his mouth. So Ed, thank you for the invitation to be part of this lecture series. Interestingly enough, sometimes even for some of us that have minimally can be called agnostic, events like today make you wonder about things. My wife just had a cataract surgery, and I was wondering how the dickens I was going to go to your building to give a presentation while she was actually sort of convalescing. And I get a call that I don't have to because the gas company has sort of helped us out. And the other interesting thing is that Duchin, who the lecture is after, he was a geologist, in fact, quite a distinguished geologist, mostly dealing with petroleum. But anyway, I'm proud to give a presentation in his honor. Well, let me say a little bit about. I'm a bit of a scoundrel in many sense, but today it's actually the title. I gave a title that I thought would bring in many people to listen to the lecture. And in fact, I am enamored with the inhabitants of the Arava Valley. But I'm going to be talking mostly about food production and security, which the Arava Valley exemplifies better than anybody else. And we'll talk a little bit about science and the kind of science we're doing in partnership with Israel to better the world. So here I go, and the first step is going to be to show my ignorance in how to do these things. But here we go, and I think that everybody should be able to see what's on the screen, and really fundamentally, the lecture today is. It's going to have a hodgepodge of science, and I hope that everybody appreciates the little that I'll throw out there. But it's all about food and food production, which is becoming a real issue in the state of Arizona. It's becoming a real issue in the world. And in Israel, it's been, like many things that they do in Israel, It's just been a miracle how they've been able to produce the food that they produce with the little soil and the little water that they have. So between our needs, our interests at the U of A and Arava Valley, as Ed pointed out, which is in the middle of what's called the Negev Desert, which is one of the driest deserts in the world, with 2 inches of rain a year at the most. And that, if you compare 2 inches of rain a year in the Arava Valley, in the Negev Desert, we get 11, 13. Some years are crazy, but you can see the difference between what we have in this desert compared to what they have in that desert. And importantly, and this is an important number to keep in mind, the Arava region, with its 5,000 people, produces 60% of the food that Israel exports to Europe. And that in itself is extraordinary. And what adds to the extraordinary, that comment, is that one, unlike the rest of Israel, which is part of a national water system that uses a lot of water that's desalinized, the Arava Valley is not part of that system. For some reason, the pipes haven't gotten down there, probably because the population is too small. And the second thing is that their soil is really dirt. So they have to go from creating their own soil, they have to go with technologies that use very little water and recycle water, which go far and beyond the drip system, which of course Israel is famous for inventing, but that can only take you so far. Okay, so this is the Western US, in fact, it's not Israel, but if you went to the Arava Valley without the green lines, that's what the Arava looks like. And in the state of Arizona, and this isn't, so again, I mentioned that I want to leave you with many points. In the state of Arizona, when the Colorado River is drying out, all the agriculture that uses that water is in jeopardy. And that has consequences, local consequences of significance, because rural Arizona may in fact disappear. In addition to mines, and agriculture is a big deal. And again, another little point to remind you all is that if you go to Yuma, as an example, Yuma produces 90% of what they call leafy vegetables for the whole country in the winter. Leafy vegetables would be lettuce and kale and all the stuff you put in your salad. So all of that is vulnerable because water is disappearing. And the reason that water is disappearing is fundamentally global climate change, which the hammer of global climate change is water. And some places are going to get more water and some places are going to get less water. It all has to do how the circulation of the oceans and the circulation of the air changes as a function of global climate change, and where it transports water and where it dries it out. This is a picture of Yuma, and you can see why it produces 90% of the green leafy vegetables for the country. And you may just sort of stare at the water in the middle of those canals and say, well, they should be using drip system. But the challenge in Yuma is not only water, it's that you have to, this is what makes agriculture so complex. You have to flood the system, because if not, you get too much salt. And if you get too much salt, then the vegetables don't grow. So growing vegetables at scale is quite a science. Okay, so this is just average value of agricultural products. This has to do with dollars. And this is more important for this particular talk, and it's a water stress index, the percentage of change that you're going to see in water in the US. And again, as I mentioned, global climate change, the hammer of global climate change is water. And you can see that to the eastern US, it all is blue. And in the western US, it's all brown. And what that is telling us is that there's going to be way more water in parts of the region of the country than they have now, and way less water in parts of the country than we have now. And we're, of course, in the bullseye, if you bring your magnifying glass, in the bullseye of water stress. And these are agricultural yields, and I won't go into that, but you can imagine that agricultural yields will change as a function of water and as a function also of temperature. So temperature is also important. And if you, for example, go to Iowa about 5 years ago, which was a very hot year, and Iowa does not have a problem with water, their yield in corn just went down the tubes because of the high temperatures. So their curves, like Gaussian, bell curves of how things grow and yield, and temperature and water, of course, are the two biggest factors. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the things that we are doing at the U of A and that we're taking to the Arava. This is where I guess our little transition to the Arava is going to come from. So at the University of Arizona, we've sort of invented this technology. A gentleman by the name of Greg Barron-Gafford, who is a faculty member in geography and a researcher at Biosphere too, he came up with the idea of growing food underneath solar panels. I'm going to leave that as a bait for the rest of the talk, but now the whole world is actually thinking of growing food underneath solar panels. And the advantages are enormous. One is you use the same land for two things, and in some places of the world, that's very important because land is not abundant. Japan, for example, would be the best example of that. It also gives you a microclimate underneath the shade of the solar panels that allows you to grow some foods that otherwise cannot be grown in the heat environment of whatever region you're at. And finally, it uses the agriculture underneath the shade. This happens to be solar panels. Underneath the shade uses at least 50% less water, because you don't dry out the soil as you would if you have the direct sunlight hitting everything. Now let's go to Israel for a moment, this is a desert strip in Israel. Of course, this is more than Israel. There's Cairo right in the middle of your slide. But as Ed pointed out, the area between the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, okay, which would be this area sort of here, is where the Negev Desert resides. And there are a couple of amazing facts about this region. One of them is that the population that lives there really believes in leaving the world a better place, which is a very Jewish kind of thing. Historically, this area is quite fascinating because, of course, it has Masada as part of it, and it has the area that made one of the reasons why it is famous. The caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered are in the Negev Desert as well. So it's a fascinating place to be. But again, if you go to the kibbutz and you see the people that live there today, they have three things that go, which is incredible. They have real partnerships with Jordan because they're right at the border with Jordan. And the water issues that they have from the Dead Sea to the Red Sea. The Dead Sea, by the way, I don't know how many of you have been in Israel recently, but it's really disappearing. The places where they used to have these spas are now, you need an elevator to get to the water below them. It's quite remarkable what a beating the region has taken with global climate change. So they're living there, and they're an example, really, of what we're going to be like 50 years from now. Okay, so it's the extreme of the desertification based on anything. So if you look at the world as an example, everybody's worried about water. And we have a lot of partnerships, for example, with France. And the French, where they make all these wines and whatnot, are beginning to worry that they're going to look like us, a desert. It could be a desert with lots of trees like ours, but still a desert. And we, of course, are going to look like the Arava. So you have a great sort of continuum of ecologies that can be tested to see where we're going with food safety and security. The other thing that the folks at Arava have done, and let me just say this quickly. This has to do with Israel as a whole, but they have less rain. They supply less water because their population growth has expanded. And nevertheless, they seem to be sort of chugging along in an amazing way. The global challenge is that what's going on there and here is going to happen probably all over. If you look at pictures of the Earth and where it's going to dry out, where it's going to rain the most as global climate change progresses, is in the southern hemisphere where you're in the ocean. All the places which have high populations and like Africa, South America, and whatnot, are going to dry out. So the world population is going up, climate change is a problem, global resources, in particular when it comes to water, is going to be an issue worldwide. And just to sort of hit the point over your heads, this year, for the first time ever, and part of it is because of the Ukraine war, but for the first time ever, the world did not produce enough food for its inhabitants. Years before, there were famines all over the place, and it had to do with economic reasons more than anything else. But this year, if you calculate the amount of food that was produced and the amount of food that is required, it's the first year in record where we have not produced enough food. So a friend of ours, Ed and mine, an amazing individual who's a citizen of this city, Mike Kasser, and his wife, Beth, decided that they envisioned that a partnership between the Arava Valley and the University of Arizona would be good for the world, and that we should focus our attention in learning from each other and then taking our knowledge to other parts of the world. In the Arava region, they're hugely interested in Kenya. So a lot of the technology that we've been developing in this partnership has now been installed in parts of Kenya. And we're quite interested, for example, in the Navajo region, and we're interested in Mexico, in the northern part of Mexico. So you can think of the Arava region as a laboratory of technologies that are going to help us with food, water, and energy security. And sort of the glue of this whole thing has been the Jewish National Fund. And as you can see, the vision there, I love it, is Tikkun Olam, which is really to make things better. And they have used their prowess in fundraising to get this institute going. And we have agricultural research, renewable energy, and let me just focus your attention on this thing called the ICAT. And I wish I had a picture of the ICAT, which is a school that way before we partnered with them. It's a school that exists in the kibbutz of Arava to educate farmers from around the world. So they're producing leaders in farming from Tibet, from Kenya, from Zambia, from all over the world. It is the most amazing outreach program I have ever seen anywhere in education. And my hat goes off to them. And that was one of the things that I was mostly impressed with. And then there's at the U of A, we have things like the arid lands research, water research, And that shouldn't be collage, it should be College of Agriculture, the kind of research that we're doing at the Biosphere as well. Now, this is the agrovoltaics. That's what this thing is called, where I said that we are farming the sun twice, once to produce electricity and once to grow stuff underneath it. And let me tell you a little bit about how this came about, because this is a fun thing to learn a little bit about how science operates. The original research was all done at Biosphere 2, and it came from an ecologist. This guy, Greg Barron Gafford, who I say is in geography, he's an ecologist. He got his Ph.D. in ecology and evolutionary biology. And he recognized what probably all of you have seen but have not internalized. And that is that when you have a baby cactus, like a baby saguaro or a baby anything in the desert, they always grow underneath what's called a nursing tree, a tree that gives them shade. Because without the nursing tree, all these cacti, when they're young, would just get fried by the sun. They don't have enough humph in them to survive a day in May in Tucson. So then the question became in the minds of this ecologist. They said, well, hell, we should be doing the same thing with farming. And the reason for that is as follows. Here's a little cartoon of what happens when you collocate something underneath the shade. So you can see the sun here, and you can see hitting this panel, which could be cardboard if you're not interested in producing electricity, but we are. And what happens is that you shade the system, which, as I mentioned before, keeps the water in the soil longer. But another really cool thing that happens, and the people that are producing electricity love, is that the plants evapotranspirate. Just like we transpire to keep ourselves cool, plants do the same. And when they do that, then this sort of cloud of humidity that is being produced cools the panels underneath. And a little known fact for if you're not an aficionado of solar panels is that the yield of electricity of a solar panel changes with heat. And the maximum yield of electricity is at about 70 degrees, 76 degrees, which never happens in the desert. And after that, they start losing the capacity to produce electricity. So all the panels that we have all over Arizona are underproducing electricity because it's so hot. But if we have a way of cooling them, and one way can be by this vegetation, then we can also produce more electricity. Okay, so that's just a curve that shows, in fact, the efficiency of solar panels as a function of temperature. And the line is extraordinarily simple to observe how quickly you lose efficiency if the temperature goes up. All right, so what you get by co-locating vegetation and renewable energy is you get energy production. That's cool. If you produce electricity in a place which is off-grid, like many of the places in the reservations, or many of the places in Africa, or many of the places around the world where they don't have electric power, then you can do a bunch of stuff with the electricity. You can pump water. You can use it to pump water. You can use it to clean water through reverse osmosis. You can use it to run a refrigerator so that the vegetables that you're growing can hang in there until you take them to market. The amount of possibilities when you have electricity is up to the imagination of the individual. So it's great. And it's not just to have light bulbs, it's really to produce economic development. All right, so you can do more than that. You can grow ecosystems that bring in butterflies. You can grow agrosystems. You can restore ecosystems. You can just do a million things, which the Israelis are the best at thinking about, including putting animals underneath the shade of the solar system. Now here's your refresh of photosynthesis and why this works. Okay, so the sun beats on plants, and since the plants can't move and can't eat anything, they produce their own energy through a thing called photosynthesis, right? They produce energy by expelling CO2 by taking CO2, expelling water, and producing sugars. So here's your cartoon. It takes CO2 out of the air. It releases water. That's why those panels can be cooled off. And it produces the energy, the chemicals that give the plant energy. So the question that becomes to many of you would be, well, shoot, if we have them in the shade, these things aren't going to grow. But that's not true. And the reason it's not true is because in places like Arizona, the amount of sunlight that these plants get is too much. And that's why they've always grown underneath nursing trees. So here is photosynthesis versus light. And you can see that photosynthesis goes up, but then it plateaus. And in places like Arizona, at 10 o'clock in the morning, these plants stop photosynthesizing, and they're just hoping, like all hope, that they don't dry out. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look at photosynthesis, one of the products is expelling water. Well, they don't want to expel water because they'll dry out. Okay. So that's just more or less sunrise and when the sun is growing. That's to give you an idea what these units of light mean. Okay. So with more light, you get less photosynthesis. You can see that it starts dropping off right after that sun. Okay, now what am I doing? Yeah, that's basically just fine-tuning those graphs. Okay, so this is the same thing, sorry. And so throughout the day, soil moisture is depleted more quickly in full sun setting. That changes the microbiome. Now we understand that the bugs in the soils are also really important for proper yields of plants. And the whole system changes when you put it in the shade. So produce electricity at the same time as you can produce plants. All right, I think, yeah. All right, this is just to beat a dead horse over the head. All right, and then what you can do, this thing here, is you can connect a vertical farm, which is what's shown in this container. So there are companies that build vertical farms in used railroad containers. This is a 40-footer. And of course, in vertical farms, and I'll say a little bit more about that, you use incredibly little water because the plants that you're growing inside of the container recycle the water. And we, in this particular container, produce 100 pounds of lettuce a week. So they're incredibly efficient, but they're very intense power hogs. So if you connect an agrivoltaic system to a vertical farm, you have expanded the possibilities of what you can grow. You use way less water, and you could probably make a better living than you do otherwise. This is just the economics, the volatile market. I won't get into the economics, but it's a big issue when you start losing water. All right, so the first research project we had in Arava is the agrivoltaics. So we first put the agrivoltaics in Arava, and what they're working on is creating the system connecting the vertical farm. So they're doing software production with artificial intelligence to figure out what are the absolutely best conditions with the least amount of water that will give you the most amount of food. Okay, the second project that we proposed to them is called aquaponics. And this, in fact, is in the Arava, and you can see some of the students they have there from Kenya. And the idea is that you grow fish, you grow agriculture. The And the defecation of the fish is what you can use to fertilize the agriculture that's downstream. So these systems produce tilapia or whatever fish may work. In the past, they tried aquaponics in the Arava region, and they couldn't make it work economically because of the food that they needed to give the fish. But we've been able to work with them so that the feeding system is such that now it works for them. So in the end, if we want any of these technologies to work, they have to have two things. They have to be economic, because it's going to be, it doesn't matter how many NGOs float around and how many governments try to support and how many philanthropic things want to support. It's really only until industry gets involved that these kinds of solutions get scaled up. And industry, of course, will not get into a business that doesn't make money. And you can see that. Let me give you an example of that. Renewable resources, right? The only reason that renewable resources is now scaling up everywhere is because, in fact, it's cheaper to produce electricity now with solar panels than it is to produce it with coal. If coal was still the cheapest way to produce electricity, it would not be scaled up because no company would be interested in that. And the same goes with electric cars. All of a sudden, an electric car doesn't cost $200,000, but a Tesla is competing with a piston cylinder BMW or even lower. And so it's all economics, and the economics is what allows you to scale up solutions throughout the world. And the focus of our innovation in the Arava is off-grid technologies, all right? And it is, in fact, for the treatment of water, agriculture, and domestic food. And here you can see what the kind of soil that you have in places like the Arava, where they get the sand out of the Jordan River. They mix it with compost. They cook it for a year so that they kill all the bugs, and then they can grow food. It's quite incredible. And this is the ICAT school that I mentioned, and these are some of the agricultural students that they have in the Arava region. So, yeah, this is too much science, I think, but I can go into all of that. The other thing that's now that we're doing with the Arava region is we're producing an international school in agrivoltaics that has the Arava region. It has Morocco, the French federal government, Mexico, which has taken agrivoltaics as a national model of not only farming, but it's also an interesting model for education, because you have engineers and physicists and material scientists worried about this part of it, and you have plant scientists worried about this part of it, and you have soil scientists worried about this part of it. So you have the kind of truly interdisciplinary research we all talk about, but where you actually do need it to fix a fundamental problem of today and the future. So what's happening right now, this you'll find all amazing. I find it amazing anyway. The way that plants are grown today, for example, in agriculture, is that they water them, right? And you can water them maybe 50% of what they needed or 60%. But now there's technology where you can actually feed the plant water exactly when it needs it. So we can measure the chemicals coming out of the leaves and see when the thing is beginning to get stressed out, so that we can water it exactly then, not before, and more than it needs. We also have, and it's just like in medicine where people are now beginning to talk about precision medicine, this kind of technologies are called precision agriculture, where you use the least amount of resources, including fertilizers, to grow food. And let's see. So yeah, that's a cartoon about that, about people that are doing those kinds of measurements. And this is just shows that the agrivoltaics, for example, when you put things under the shade, it modifies photosynthesis in predictable ways. So you have basil, beans, tomatoes, and you can see how the tomato has its photosynthesis that goes like this, and this thing is following the shade, but it doesn't matter. You've already produced. The largest amount of photosynthesis has already been happening in full sun versus agrivoltaics. So cool stuff. And they vary by plant. With respect to the plant sciences that I've mentioned before, we've been working on plants, for example, that grow in salty water. Because one of the problems that you have in Arava and everywhere else, including Arizona now, where you have water that comes from wells, the deeper you go in wells, the saltier water gets. That's just life. So you end up with water that produces very bad yields for plants and undrinkable anyway. And that's why you have to clean it up, even if it's not salty water from the ocean, it's too salty for plants. So plant sciences is now producing, and these are not GMOs, these are just selective genetics, growing things that grow in salty water, like tomatoes. And like I like to say, you won't have to put salt in your tomatoes anymore. So I think instead of going on and on about agrivoltaics, this is where we started, about growing food and plants underneath solar panels. You can see what we're trying to do. We're trying to create in the Arava, because of the philosophy of the people in the Arava, we're trying to produce experiments that will help the world, connect us to their school, which is better than anything I've ever seen in economic development, and make things better. And I cannot imagine working with a community that is more humbling than the community in Arava. I'll quit there, and I thank you all for your attention, and I thank Ed for inviting me to present this to all of you. Thank you. And I'll get rid of this. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Joaquin. That was great. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then I'll read them off. Or Joaquin, if you can see the chat, you can go ahead and respond to them. I'll start with one that I thought of. When you talked about plants, is it potential for almost any plant to be grown in this way, or is there are there features that limit that other than just the soil, which could be augmented? Is it limitless?
It is, but some don't do as well. So the best example for those of us that live here in the Southwest is chilies. So if you grow jalapenos underneath the shade, they don't do well at all. And if you grow chiltepin, which is a local chili from here, it grows like nuts. So, and it has to do with natural selection, either natural selection by nature or natural selection by us. So all the corn that's grown around the world has been now naturally selected to grow in full sun. And so that won't work very well underneath solar panels. And chiltepines, which always grow underneath the shade of a tree, do very well, whereas jalapenos they themselves have bred themselves out so that they grow in the sun. So it's a hodgepodge. Basil grows like nuts because basil is a leaf, and it starts looking for the sun And the basil that we're growing in underneath the solar panels is the shape of the size of your hand instead of the little things that because it's looking for the sun. And we have had a lot of tests with how they taste, and we're working on nutrition to see if nutrition changes. At the moment, those plants where the yield, because we don't even pay attention to the ones where the yield goes down, but the ones where the yield goes up, all of them, and that includes squash and lavender and beans and tomatoes that do better in the shade, their taste is the same, and the nutrition has not changed.
Okay. We get a few questions here. Beth Nakai is asking, I wonder if most of the work in the Arava is funded through private resources or the government, assuming Israeli or American government.
No. Okay. The Arava is the pride of the Jewish National Fund. So they have a lot of projects in the Arava which benefit all these things. But they have companies. They produce 120% of their own electricity. And they have an electric company that's also that's electrifying a lot of Kenya. So they have businesses going. I don't think they get a whole lot of money from the government, frankly.
Sid Listener asks, where would we get solar panels? China, Korea? What are the social, economic, and political risks for the United States?
Oh, well, that's a question that's solar panels are produced everywhere, but the cheap solar panels all came out of China. That's what and they flooded the system with panels. Making solar panels is not very complicated, and I don't think we need to worry about local production of solar panels if the Chinese system was to disappear or that we wouldn't have access to it. It's very different than chips for computers, where they are key producers of that kind of technology, or natural resources like some of the elements that are needed, like rare earths for chips. For solar panels, that's not the case, even though they still produce a lot of them.
Interesting. Earlier today, I was watching the news from Israel, and there was a presentation on these thin, flexible solar panels that are virtually indestructible.
Yeah.
So as it advances, they can be used in any number of applications.
Yeah, there's all kinds of technologies. There are people that are looking at paints that produce electricity. There are people that are looking at films that can be put in greenhouses or in your house, basically, in the windows. Material sciences is a big deal. And in particular, there's a lot of interest for agriculture of producing films that can be used like in solar panels, not solar panels, but in greenhouses that allow the proper light to go through, the wavelength of light to go through that makes plants grow, but not the heat. So yeah, it's just fascinating what's going on in that field.
Exploding. Joel Alpert asked, you mentioned kibbutz Arava. Is that a specific kibbutz, or are you referring in general to kibbutzim in general in the Arava?
I was referring to kibbutzim in general. I don't think there's a kibbutz Arava. The most famous one starts with a K. You must know the name of it. I forgot. Anyway, yeah.
Becky Shulman asks, are the people at Arava still working collaboratively with Jordan now that the under the current political conflict in Israel? I think I might add to that the issue of those two areas between Israel and Jordan, where land is actually in Jordan, was leased to Israeli farmers for a while. Are you involved in any of that?
We're not. But I do know that I mean, there's some national issues that the kibbutzim can't deal with, but they work as best as the national agenda allows them to with the Jordanians. They do. And of course,
here's an anonymous question. Can recordings of this webinar be given to the government sections who can give money to research for this?
Yeah, of course.
We can make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's your recording, so yeah.
With your permission.
Yeah, sure.
Joel Alpert asks again, you mentioned beyond drip irrigation. Is that the photovoltaics covering plants? Does one combine it with drip irrigation?
Yep, you can do that. Our hope is that we don't even need drip irrigation, that we can actually always drip irrigation, but it would be with way more sophisticated timing. But things that they've done in the Arava, the thing that blew my mind away was they have a big grove of dates, of palm trees. Mm-hmm. And the whole grove is sitting on concrete tub. So they recycle all the water that's being fed into the palms. Mm-hmm. None of it, it's called a lysimeter for those that know what that means. But just imagine an enormous concrete tub, and all of the trees are grown in it, and they're just recycling the water all the time. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of recycling of all kinds of water in the Arava. That is, it's amazing.
Becomes an example.
Yeah.
Most of North Africa, here's another anonymous question. Most of North Africa and the Middle East regions are desert. Beyond the few Muslim countries you mentioned, how many other Muslim countries are open to cooperation with Israel and the U of A with this type of food production?
Well, the place is enormous, but there's been partnerships with Ethiopia. There's been partnerships with Rwanda, with Zambia, with obviously with Kenya, and with Morocco. And the only reason that it's been those countries and not others is because some of us have had some kind of collaboration with them. And, it's just a matter of connecting with the right people to get things done. So we're trying to get a partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation to get us into many of these places. The Rockefeller Foundation, I've been told, has decided that they want to spend a fair amount of their fortune on food safety and security. So they're looking at these kinds of ideas that we have.
Sid, listener writes that the kibbutz we were referring to, kibbutz K, kibbutz Keturah.
Yes, that's it.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Sid. Leonard Hammer, our colleague Leonard Hammer, asks, interesting about sifting the dirt from the Jordan River. Wondering about the year-long process to sift the dirt and energy efficiency. Presumably, it is solar-based. Just wondering.
Yeah, no, I didn't explain myself clearly here, but they make these mounds of dirt that they just, it's mostly sand. It's not dirt. There's no dirt. It's mostly sand that they collect. And then they mix it. This is all by hand or, tractors or whatever, with compost. They then cover it with tarp, just a tarp, for a year. And that inoculates the soil, because they've now created soil, but they've inoculated it. They've actually gotten rid of the bugs because the temperature underneath the tarp gets so high. It would be the equivalent of people that make wine putting sulfites in their wine to get rid of all the natural yeast so that they can control the taste of the wine. Okay, then they put their own yeast, and they don't have the wild yeast. Well, these farmers are controlling the microbiome of the soil by cooking it and then adding what they want to add to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah. Leonard also asks and points out, Is there any room for incorporating other U of A departments here into the work with the Arava associations? For example, Eller, the business school, and assisting with bringing involved African nations to the market issues that that you've mentioned?
Absolutely. Perhaps what would be a very good idea, there's a governing board for this partnership, and it includes my good friend, his name is Udi Gatz, who lives in that kibbutz and was a mayor of Arava. He's incredible. And it includes Sharon Megdal. It includes, anyway, it includes about 6 people. And it may be a really good idea to have a Zoom with this governing board and to discuss opportunities that the audience here may want to bring up. Yeah, I'd love that. I think that's always been the idea. We had a big partnership also with Southwestern Studies, because of the applied anthropology and going to Kenya, but that fizzled out. But still, it's very important. You know, you can't just show up with a box of nuts and bolts and expect people to use it. So there's an enormous amount of sociology, of economics, of applied anthropology, of you name it. But my thesis, though, is that this is one of those partnerships that sort of became natural the minute that it happened. So that means that it's not being forced on anybody, that all of us see the use of the partnership to make the world better. Therefore, adding stuff to it is a great idea. I can tell you that the way that it all started was the Jewish National Fund went to Mike Kasser and they said, we have this idea. And Mike came to me and I said, I think it's a brilliant idea. And then then he funded a delegation of Arava folks to come to the U of A. And then he funded a delegation of U of A folks to go to Arava. And it was one of those things that was love at first sight on both ends. It was just I've never seen anything like that. And I've spent my whole career trying to make partnerships. This was just automatic. We all saw the power of it. Yeah.
That's great. Joel Alpert says slightly off topic, but I think not much. Actually, it's very important. Dead Sea is drying up. We all know that. You mentioned how it's receding. Can one run a siphon from either the Red Sea or the Mediterranean to feed the Dead Sea? Basically the Red Dead project, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a project about getting water from the Red Sea to back up for a long time. I think, I don't even know how much it costs, but it's a project that's been around for about 10 years. They tell me. I haven't been involved in it for that time. So I don't know if it's going to happen or not. The other thing, of course, that the Israelis are doing is that they're pumping desalinized water into the Kinneret. So that, of course, is what feeds everything south of it. So there are 2 possibilities to fix the hydrology of the Negev desert. And I think the Israelis are looking at both. I'm not sure which one they'll choose.
So they haven't yet started pumping desal into the Sea of Galilee, Kinneret. They haven't started that?
I don't think so, but I think that's a plan that's closer to reality than pumping water from the Red Sea.
Okay. One last question. Joel asked, was it a tarp or black plastic that covered the composting, or some
black plastic? Yeah.
Okay. Very well.
He's been there, obviously.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that makes the work of the Center for Genetic Studies exciting is the many collaborations and involvements we have across campus. Genetic Studies is not, a thing in of itself. We have yourself, Karen Megdal, others involved across campus. And I want to thank you for bringing your expertise here. You and I talked about this for some time. I'm glad it finally worked out, that we were all in the same place. I'm sorry that we're not in person, but it's better to be safe than sorry in gathering a building full of gas, I guess.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you once again, Joaquin, for this great presentation. I'll tell everybody that this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the Genetic Studies website. You can find it there. It'll take a week or two before it's all tidied up and posted. But you've made a great contribution. And as you noted, Ralph Duchin's work in geology, Ralph and Sally would be, I know, that they of blessed memory would be very, very thrilled to have had you in this series. So thank you, Joaquin.
Thank you. And for your public, thank you. I mean, I'm honored. And for your public, of course, anybody can read. I mean, U of A folks or anybody else, they can reach me directly at my email, and I'd be more than happy to talk about possibilities with anybody that wants to ring me.
Great. You can look him up through the U of A website. Easy to find.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.